organizing this now. Who wants to go first? First question.
Just one question. You said at the beginning that your main question would be about populism. That is in novelty. Well, in what sense are you speaking about populism? Because we had populism in Brazil and in Latin America was one of our main political creations, populism. In our case, populism meant very clearly integration of people. So this was populism. So people outside of the system and some leader within the system proposed the integration of these people. And they became populists, leaders. So to what extent this is supposed to apply to what you have just said?
Would you like to take another one and then you address them?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
With your president? No. It's like, that's a diplomatic faux pas. One does not do that. Look, I think it's a very important question. And again, I think that given where it's emerging right now and how it's emerging, it's hard to see it being an integrating force. Look at Spain versus Catalonia. Not an integrating force. In the United States, look at the way Trump uses the NFL, right? 70% of all the players are black. The coaches and the owners are all white. The fans are white. He knew exactly what he was doing. That's populism in the United States, but it's very divisive. If the US were a different country with a different culture at a different time, then you could see populism in the US being an integrated force. But I fear, given how it is emerging now as an anti-globalist force, and given that the elites still hold so much power, it strikes me that creative and entrepreneurial elites will use that anger and that political force, and they will channel it into identity politics, which are easy to do. So channel it into us versus them, which is actually the title of my new book, which is not, it won't be out till April, but I just wrote it. It's about this issue, and it's about just how much more corrosive populism is now for this reason, for this exact reason.
All right.
Do you think the decline of American-led world is the decline this time for real? And how do you see a China-led world? How different would it be from what we have today?
Well, I do think it's for real. I do think that the unwillingness and lack of capacity of the United States to be the global policeman or the architect of free trade, or perhaps most importantly, the cheerleader on global values, is well past the point of no return. I really do. And I think one of the reasons for that, perhaps one of the saddest reasons for that, is because the G0 does not affect the United States very much. You can't get the refugees over. The terrorism's not as much of a threat. The big geopolitical struggles like India versus China, South China Sea, East China Sea, North Korea, those are far away. Middle East, Russia, Ukraine. I mean, geopolitically, you could argue that the G0, at least in the short term, is a benefit to the US because it seems so much more attractive that the dollar gets stronger. So it helps mitigate against the erosion you would otherwise see of the dollar of the global reserve currency. Now, you could argue that over the long term, it's going to make it worse, right? But American political system is not baked for the long term in terms of decisions, right? I'm not sure we're entering a China-led world. I do think that the economic system increasingly is going to have China as the dominant player. China's economy is smaller than the US, only 60% of the US GDP. But of course, China directs that economy. They write the big checks. They have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. They have One Belt, One Road. So the Chinese ability to get countries to do what they want economically, unless they have military alliances with the US that are dominant, like Japan does, is growing a lot. But when I think about China's diplomatic capabilities, they're anemic. I mean, when we go to the G20, you can always tell the Chinese diplomats, they're the ones standing in a corner talking to themselves. They don't know anybody else, and they're not comfortable going out like that because they don't want to be told on by their colleagues. It's not as bad as North Korea, but it's not close, right? China's not a major energy player, they're importer. They're not a major food player, they're an importer. Technology is the one area where the Chinese are really investing in. If you look at what the Chinese are doing on AI, their new plan, their 2030 plan, that kind of should scare you. Because the Chinese government is saying, you know what? We don't think AI is like climate change. We don't think it's a whole bunch of different experiments. Maybe some will work, some won't. We think AI is like the Manhattan Project. It's like the H-bomb. And what we need to do is put a whole bunch of money into that. Get the best scientists, the best computing power, and just build it. Like what NASA did with the moonshot. And of course, America's not doing NASA much anymore. It's the private sector. So I honestly don't know which of those two win. But, you know, I don't think we're talking about how a China-led world looks like. I think we're talking about a world that for the next 10 years is increasingly fragmented. That has pockets of regional leadership, some that are effective, some that are not, have some pockets that are completely chaotic, and have some pockets of war, like the Middle East. I mean, the Middle East, you know, Iran and Iraq versus the Kurds, this is another Iraq war, right now, in front of us. Saudi Arabia and Emirates versus Qatar, it could easily fragment the GCC. We're going to see a lot of that, right? And so I think that long term, if you ask me to go into like when China could become the world leader, really look at 2040, 2050, and Xi Jinping said 2050 is when he expects China becomes the world leader. You know what? I'm not sure that states look anything like they do today in 2050. Because I don't know who provides the leadership. I don't know who gives you security. Is it a state? Is it a corporation? Is it something more local? Is it something connected to your individual? What does society look like? I think that once you get into AI, and you start changing how human beings interact with each other in society, that fundamentally, then the governance system is just going to change, right? And, you know, fortunately, that's not something we need to address today, but, you know, our kids will, and it's going to be important. Yeah.
Ian, congratulations, very good presentation, as always. A quick question, still in relation to the same subject. We keep hearing about the growing importance of private China, the growing importance of private China. What is your perspective on that?
So, first of all, from Xi Jinping's speech yesterday, more financial liberalization, yes. More opportunities for foreign investment, yes. More power for state enterprises, yes. He is not going to dismantle the state enterprise system, no way. No one should think he is. It's an advantage for him to have industrial policy in today's environment. He knows it. Government knows it. I think the fact that even if you are in the private sector, if you're remotely in IT, big data, the rest, you are working necessarily with the Chinese government as a patriotic company. When Trump won, I sat down with Jared Kushner, and we had a lunch. Thank you. And he talked to me. He said, you look at these American companies. Oh, yeah, sure. They brought two at the same time. You look at these American companies, they're not patriotic, right? Chinese companies in the private sector are patriotic because they have to be. There's no rule of law. There's no independent judiciary. Try to be non-patriotic as a Chinese company, you're going to get in trouble. If you don't know about social credit, read about social credit. Because social credit is a new system being rolled out by the Chinese government now that will affect all individuals and companies. And it will give them a credit score connected to not just how economically stable they are, but how they behave, who they're connected to. Any dissidents, anything problematic, anything they don't like, lower social credit score means you won't get business done. That's really important. It's enormously powerful. The United States could never put something like that in place, right? So I think that the private sector in China, yes, probably makes more money, but think of the private sector in Russia. Like when the Russians suddenly need something, you do it. Because if you don't, you're out. I think that's the way the private sector is going to work in China.
Since we're talking about China, the general counsel of China wants to make a question.
Yes. Well, well, introduce myself first because I'm a. Okay. Yeah, I'm a new Consul General of China, so Your Honor, President. Well, just 2 months. So, well, I'm not sure whether I will have a question, but because so many comments on China. So I have to say, because just at least for one purpose that you said that the Chinese diplomat doesn't want to talk, so just want to let everybody know that not always like that. So I want to talk, want to communicate with all my dear colleagues here. And so thank you very much to introduce so much about the yesterday's the National Congress of the Communist Party of China. And it's really a very important event, not only for Chinese people, for Chinese Communist Party, but also for the whole world. So yeah, like you already introduced so much in details, more than I already learned that. So I think what maybe just ignore the a little bit long speech by Xi Jinping, but I think maybe you yeah, it's a little bit long, but it's really the content, the
25 minutes.
yes. But the content is very rich, because not only regarding the conclusion about the past 5 years, all the achievements and maybe some still existing problems, but also for the next, not only next five years, but also, well, it's about to the center of this century. So the whole next few decades about the China's its development plan. It's the plan, the blueprint for the Chinese people, for the Chinese society, the whole country, and also for the its international relation policy regarding the like the one point we raised the proposal like to build the a community with shared future for mankind. So that's the international. So we appeal that the peace and development and cooperation, that's the three maybe pillars for the international relations. And also for internally, although we still have China, not we, China still has a lot of problems internally, but it has its determination through the Xi Jinping speech to give the whole Chinese Communist Party the mission that to have to provide a happiness life to ordinary people, and have to strict self-governance to the whole society and the country, and also, of course, the party. So I think it's important. It's long, but it's very rich. So yeah, should be patient to read that. And among the during your previous comments about the, I think I fully agree that there are some more possibilities and more models for all nations or countries to consider which they could choose. And that's what we agree, that we always believe that there's no any one copy say it's the best or correct or only unique one who can apply to every nation or country. So like US cannot say your system is the best one, can apply to even for China, and it's of course it's not right. And for China now, we believe the socialism with Chinese characteristics is the appropriate way, at least so far. Up to now, we find it's the appropriate way for Chinese people to choose that system. But still, we don't believe that what we think is right for us maybe not correct for the others. So I think which is the best model or best possibility, best choice for that nation, belong to that nation to make a decision. So regard to the private sectors, I think yeah, I don't want to say too much. I still, although I want to talk, but I cannot talk too much. So okay, just find the question. Maybe what's your perspective to the so-called a community of shared future for mankind? So you think it could be a common understanding, and with that common goal for the whole international community to make efforts, you think it's worth doing that?
So the first, I appreciate that. The first thing, I didn't know that the Chinese Consul General was here. But the beautiful thing, anyone that knows me knows that it would not have changed my comments one bit. And I'm very honest about this stuff. And I do think that, that it is true that there are some Chinese diplomats that are coming up. The number 2 in the US, in the Chinese embassy in Washington, my China people have regular conversations with him. He is shockingly willing to actually just have a real conversation and not toe the party line. That is not the culture of Chinese diplomats, right? And so I would argue it's going to take a long time before the Chinese foreign ministry starts feeling like the U.S. Department of State or the UK, foreign office. They're way behind. But there's no question that they see that this is more important for them over time, and they're starting to seed with diplomats that are good. I also would argue that there are a lot of places. So everyone looks to India. Not about China. I haven't talked about India yet. Everyone looks to India for to be a part of these solutions, right? On climate change, where are the Indians? On geopolitics, on sort of checking China, where are the Indians? The Indians have 1.4 billion people, and they have the same number of diplomats as New Zealand, which has like 4 million people, right? So, I mean, nobody ever asks where are the Kiwis, because we don't care, right? But no, we know that the Kiwis can't get anything done because they're tiny. Well, the Indians diplomatically are tiny. And so the fact that China has had this incredible run of economic expansion, and they're now almost the size of the U.S. economy, and again, their political capacity to use that is even greater than the U.S. economy. That's amazing. But let's not pretend that that's meant that China's been able to develop in all of those other ways at the same time. There's a reason why Xi Jinping said, yeah, we're ready to be global superpower like in 2050. They're not ready. They know they're not ready. And frankly, they would rather be quiet about it. Because if they're forced to be ready soon, like Xi Jinping didn't want to give that globalization speech at Davos last year, right? But when Trump comes up and says trade war, protectionism, suddenly Xi Jinping is the strongest leader out there. He's stronger than, Putin is a strong leader, but his economy's smaller than Canada. Merkel used to be a strong leader. She's kind of eroding now, and she's got a lot of problems at home, right? But let's keep in mind, you asked about what does a Chinese-led world look like. This point that was just raised by Madam Consul General was very important, which is that the Chinese believe that no one have the right to have, that their system is best. It's a relativism about the systems, where the Americans have historically believed, along with most developed markets, that there are actually values in having liberal democracy that are aspirational for human beings. And so there's no question that because the Chinese economic model is now becoming dominant, the relevance of global standards on basic things like rule of law, independent judiciary, even human rights, is going to erode very significantly. And by the way, Trump loves that. Trump is very transactional. Trump feels more like a traditional Chinese foreign policy guy. He's like, look, it's all about getting a deal done. And when Trump first became president, a lot of Chinese in the foreign ministry kind of thought, hey, we can work with this guy. Remember that House of Cards is watched by almost everyone in the government in Beijing. And I remember when I was there and a senior Chinese official asked me, they said, so tell me, Ian, when he throws the prostitute in front of the train and kills her, like, which president was that? And so you know what I said? I said it could have been so many. I figured, so you asked a question though. I can't just have fun with you. You asked a question, which is, do I think that there's going to be a common and collective model for humanity going forward? And so Bill Gates, I love Bill Gates. Bill Gates is such an extraordinary human being. He's done so much for humanity. And he wrote in his annual report last year, he said, the most extraordinary thing is we now have the technology and the economic capacity that no one should be poor anymore. The only reason that anyone should be poor is because of politics, not because we don't have the technology, we don't have the food, we don't have the money. He's right. Unfortunately, I am a political scientist. And the history of politics shows you that we are an in-group, out-group mentality, right? It goes from, sort of when original Homo sapiens decided that we were going to kind of get rid of the Neanderthals who had a better shot, and we did. When we find people out there that we think aren't very useful, our initial impulse is different. Let's do something to them. Doesn't have to be race, doesn't have to be gender, it could be anything. But I fear that those divisions don't go away with technology. I think that technology just, they sharpen the goodness and the badness of us. That's the bad news. The good news is that we never get the best from human beings unless we're really being challenged. This is what they call flow state, when you're like really in the zone, whether you're playing basketball or you're giving a speech. If you're just doing the same old all the time, it's no big deal, right? On the other hand, if you're like coming to Brazil and you're talking to the guy that actually matters in the country, you kind of up your game a little bit. You get in the flow state, right? That clearly global challenges in the next 10 years are going to require more of us, and we're going to give more. We're going to do more. We're going to work harder. We're going to be creative. And I think that's what makes me optimistic about the Americans, the Chinese, and everyone in between, is that when it gets hard, that's when you'll see the best from our societies. Even though we won't understand each other, we'll be divided, we'll be a little mistrustful, but we'll do better. Right now, we're not doing that well. Let's admit it.
All right, I'm afraid we're running out of time, and we have dessert served. But may I abuse my prerogative and ask the last question, which is, you haven't mentioned North Korea, which is clearly the single most destabilizing factor in the world system nowadays. I don't think this is a sideshow. What is your take on North Korea and this strategic game between North Korea, the U.S., China?
Japan, yeah. Russia.
South Korea, Europe.
Well, look, I mean, let's be clear. 10 years ago, there was a conceit here. Now I'm going to say something because the Consul General is here. 10 years ago, there was a conceit in America that North Korea was a client state of China, and China would do everything to support North Korea against the U.S. Very few people still believe that. If you look at the North Korean cyber hacks and attacks against China, the WannaCry virus, for example, the Chinese are clearly very deeply unhappy. And it's very clear the Chinese are willing to do more to sanction the North Koreans, to crack down on smuggling, which they were mostly ignoring before, because they're angry at North Korea, not because they so want to support Trump. I think it's actually quite constructive that we have in the Security Council 15-0 votes right now to show that there is on this one issue a world community that says that the North Koreans are up to no good and have to be stopped. But let's also recognize that in a G0 world, the ability of governments to say no to the United States is going up. Say no to anyone you want, really, right? I mean, you remember Obama tell the Russians they had to get out of Crimea, had to get out of Ukraine. We had a Twitter campaign for that, right? Awesome. Obama said that Assad must go, right? Who cares, right? These are not policies. These are aspirations, they're philosophies, they're bio statements, that they're not relevant. They're marketing. And when Trump says that North Korea has to denuclearize, you want to talk about suicidal. That's suicidal, right? Gaddafi, no nukes, dead. Saddam Hussein, no nukes, dead. Kim Jong-un, nukes, seems okay, right? Like if I were advising Kim Jong-un, and I'm not, right? But if I were, I would tell him, you should do everything possible, as fast as possible, publicly, to demonstrate that you have deterrent effect, so that Trump, even in the 1% chance that Trump is unhinged and he fires Mattis and all the rest, that he still says, I can't hit him because maybe he can hit me back. It's obvious. But the solution, so I think that there are two potential solutions for North Korea, really. One, well, there's three options, two solutions. I mean, the bad option is that we have an accident and that there's more testing in the region. Let's say, so Trump is about to go to South Korea, and he might go to the DMZ, which is an awesome time for the North Koreans to test a weapon, right? Just an awesome time. So what happens if they test another ICBM? It goes longer, it goes over Japan, and it falls. And it kills some Japanese. I don't know what the chance that is. Is it 1% chance? I don't know. All I'm saying is the possibility of something like that leading to war is like not zero. Maybe it's 5%, but it's a lot higher than it should be because of Kim Jong-un and Trump. Okay, so that's one possibility. Second possibility is Trump, who doesn't care about human rights. Trump cares about human rights less than the Chinese government, okay? Less. And he's the American president, which is also, I was really interesting. The head of Caixin came and interviewed me from the United States. She's a really impressive journalist. And she asked me, she said, right after, Ivanka Trump, they had the Mar-a-Lago meeting, and the Chinese government gave Ivanka all of these rights to sell shoes and stuff into China. And so she asked me, she said, is this a good idea for the Chinese government to do this? Is it going to work? And I'm like, I hate to admit this to you, but it's an awesome idea for China. It's horrible for the United States, but it makes the Chinese point so right. They've been saying for so many years, you Americans are hypocrites. Your system is no better. You're just as corrupt. So when the president is willing to do this, even though, like, Ivanka selling shoes is not Odebrecht, okay? It's not. It's not like Indian military acquisition. It's not Sechin and Transneft. Like, it is tawdry, stupid corruption. But when the president does that, it shows that everything is relative. Everything is equal. So I do think because Trump doesn't care about human rights, the ability of Trump to say, let's cut a deal with the North Koreans, okay? If the North Koreans actually stop testing for a while once they prove this, I could see Trump in a year or 2 years' time, 3 years' time, second-term Trump if he wins again. I could see him saying, let's invite Kim Jong-un. Let's just talk to him. And so I think there's a possibility of an actual breakthrough that Obama could never do because he would be linking it to you've got to treat your citizens well, and da-da-da. Trump doesn't care. Trump just wants a deal. Transactional. Last point is the most likely outcome is all this bluster, and like with Syria, Assad's still there. Like with Russia, they're still in Ukraine. So North Korea keeps their nukes, and then they become like Pakistan. Remember, America said, Pakistan, don't you dare test a nuke. We will sanction you. We will never accept this. Then 20 years later, we get rid of the sanctions. Why? Because our policy failed. We did it quietly because we didn't want to embarrass ourselves, because the Americans can never be publicly wrong. Never be publicly wrong, right? But quietly, sometimes we can admit that was a stupid policy, especially when it was on another president, right? So, I mean, ultimately, look, North Korea is a nuclear power. We are not going to change that. That's a reality. It's an uncomfortable reality. You know, we have America, one of the biggest problems the Americans have is the whole Apollo mission complex. Failure is not an option, right? And so you have these Americans that are like, we're going to fix climate change. And we go to the Maldives and we say, guys, we're going to fix climate change. That doesn't do anything for them. All it does is stuff for us. It basically is like making us feel better, even though they're going to lose their country. Like the decent, the humane thing to do, if we were Canadians, what we would do is we would go to the Maldives and would say, you know what, guys, like we're not bad people, but we screwed up, and we're not going to fix this, and you're not going to have a country. And that's really horrible. So we'll take a bunch of you in as refugees, but we're also going to help and provide money and try to help you with other countries find a place to live. That's what we're going to do. That would be humane. But the problem is that because the Americans can't accept failure, it makes it so much worse. Just these bullheaded white guys, right? That we never want to admit we're wrong about anything. Ask my wife. She's like, Ian, you are so frustrating, right? We never do it. I can't. She's a lawyer, and she is. Whenever we argue, and it's not often, she is right 100% of the time. But I can never admit it till like the next day. Because I can't do it right then. It's just too hard. It's like genetic and ingrained. I'm like American, I'm white, and I'm like a guy. It's all three. And in the United States, we have this problem. And I think that with North Korea is what makes it hard. Is that if we could just admit, you know what? We meant well when we said we wanted the North Koreans to denuclearize. You know what? We failed. We meant well when we said Assad has to go. We weren't up for it. It was too hard. The options were lousy. We failed. We meant well when we said the Russians have to leave Crimea and Ukraine. We meant well when we actually recognized Kosovo, even though it was against international law. Like, the fact is, the Americans historically, when we're at our best, have actually done wonderful things. But when we're at our worst and we refuse to admit it, then everything becomes equal. That's an enormous problem for the world. It's an enormous challenge. And it actually facilitates a much more dangerous planet than the one I think we all otherwise want to live on. So anyway, thank you for that, and thank you for having me back, and let's have some dessert.